Welcome to Show Studio. It's our first roundup panel of the menswear season, and we're going to be talking about London Collections Men's Spring Summer 16. So there's absolutely loads to talk about. London Collections Men have been going for sort of like 3 years, but already it's so rich in what you see there. So many different things, so many different perspectives, people coming from all over the world. And this season was quite special in some ways because there were certain anniversaries that were quite exciting. But before we kind of delve into all of that, I'll let my fabulous set of panellists introduce themselves, starting with you, Stavros.
Hi, I'm Stavros Karelis, and I'm the founder and bank director of Machine A Store.
I'm Princess Julia, and I work freelance at ID Magazine and also Man About Town.
I'm Richard Mortimer, I'm a freelance journalist.
I'm Gordon Richardson, the creative director of Topman.
Hi everyone, it's gone really
Hello.
serious. So I mentioned the kind of anniversaries, and before I ask everyone's highlights, I want to just pick a highlight to talk about first, which is the Man Show, because it's the 10-year anniversary of Man, which is crazy when you think about it, because firstly, as we were saying, it makes everyone feel really old, but also it's real testimony to the support that people like Topman and Fashionistas give to young designers, and I think it made everyone really proud to reflect on the designers that have come through Man, which is obviously Fashionistas and Topman's sort of sponsorship and support system for young designers. And there was a film that they showed at the start of the show, I'm sure you all saw, with kind of like, you know, that reflected on people like Kim Jones, who's now at Louis Vuitton, or Julia Andersen, who's now at Loewe, and Christopher Shannon, all the amazing people that have come through it. It must make everyone very proud to be in London at the shows. Stavros, did you like the Man Show?
Yes.
I'm going to get you first.
I love the Man Show, and I think it's one of the shows that everyone is expecting to see when they visit London or when they live in London. And during Menswear Fashion Week, I mean, I think they began the whole situation, and they built the Menswear Fashion Week built around the Man Show, basically. And it's a great testimony for London and for the strength of Topshop, and also, you know, of Fashionistas and Louis Kennedy, and what amazing job they have done. And when as you said, when before the show began, and you saw the film and you see all these people talking about it, it was just a small example of the people that have been through Man Show, because it was obviously, as you said, Kim Jones and JW, Christopher Shannon, Astrid Andersen, but they've been so many through Man, and it's a great step, because I think they have a great record of amazing successes and successful stories, and I think that we all are very, very, very proud of what Man has achieved so far.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Gordon, I was going to go to you first, but I thought it would be a cliche. But it's interesting what Stavros said when he said, you know, like Man is kind of like, it's kind of been instigated all of London Collections Men, really. Like, without Man, would you have got that?
It kind of was. It was the starting point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously down to Lulu primarily. Came to us and said everything's happening in menswear. Just came out the Central St Martin show. It was all looking fabulous. Happened to be in Topshop next door. Came to Topman, and we said, we're ready. This is fantastic for us. Yeah. So it was the most wonderful kind of working relationship, and so many, as you say, so many good designers gone through it. Yeah. And when you see the roll call, I mean, talking on that film, just as an aside, was quite an emotional thing. And I think we could have made that film an hour long, I'm sure, because you know me, when I start talking for half an hour. I won't do that today. But you can talk passionately about something you love, and I'm sure everyone else would have done the same. And so to edit that film down into 4 minutes or whatever it was, didn't perhaps do justice to all the really good designers who'd come through. So it was a proud moment, and I think everyone felt quite emotional in the audience to see how the roster of people and designers that have gone through that, which is phenomenal. Doesn't happen anywhere else.
No, it doesn't. And I think the thing that struck me is it's kind of made me think about the different ways that you define a designer's success, because some of the names in that film were kind of, you know, on the surface, kind of obviously very successful designers, people like Kim or people like JW Andersen. But there were also names within that who perhaps aren't showing anymore, perhaps aren't even designing, they're lecturing or doing something else, but what they did opened doors for other people, and I think that's really interesting. It made me reflect a lot on what it means to actually to make it as a designer. And we often talk about when people drop off the schedule, it's a sign that something's gone wrong, and obviously it's very upsetting at the time, and like when people like Medium Kirchhoff stopped showing, everyone was very upset. But I think the legacy of what they've done and the kind of doors they open for other people, that's just as valid as a term of success.
I think it was the platform that allowed everyone to see that you could make a success of menswear.
Yeah.
So then it sort of kick-started that whole thought process in all our amazing colleges that actually were you to study menswear, you could possibly have a career out of it and a very successful one.
Yeah.
So it was that platform really that did it for everyone.
Because we almost remember a time where London, well, menswear as a whole wasn't something that people were excited about, wasn't something people were writing about. Do you remember that kind of period, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to like these Savile Row shows and like they'd be sort of sandwiched in between like, well, sort of at the end of the day of a show at Women's Wear in London. And everyone was just like, oh God, we've got to go to this menswear thing. And it's really funny looking back, you know, that's going back maybe 12 years ago. And sort of the reaction to menswear now is just so completely different. It's really hard to imagine now that menswear was once an afterthought in London.
You even look at the style magazines that we have. I was reading, there's a good piece in The Guardian about Man, and it talks about the kind of the point it came along. It was a similar time to things like, you know, really great men's style magazines coming out, whether it's like GQ Style or you know, Man About Town or whatever it was. And I think that's really interesting, that kind of like just interest in general, like really great shoots featuring menswear. And yeah, it's an interesting, exciting time. Do you remember no one caring about menswear as well?
Do I
remember no one caring about menswear as well?
I think there was an interest in menswear, but as you said, it was just sort of on the end of the women's wear. So for me personally, I'm always very excited about menswear, and I really enjoy our menswear week as well. It's got a really nice atmosphere to it, and it's worthwhile checking into.
I mean, I think what for me is really interesting about Man is that their selection of designers is often quite challenging. I know quite often there'll be designers that show as part of Man that I just don't get at all. I don't understand it. But obviously, you know, Lulu and Gordon and the whole panel see something in these people, and it's kind of weird that given the chance to grow after a few seasons, quite often, a few of these designers that I've completely misunderstood from the very beginning, something clicks, and I just think it's really, really amazing that they have this opportunity to grow and to develop and become this thing. And yeah, I just think sometimes I don't understand it, and because they have this opportunity and this platform, I think it's kind of amazing that a few seasons down the line, actually their vision becomes really clear and actually commercially viable, you know, because quite often it is sort of quite daring what they do at Man, and I think it just becomes a little bit more refined and a little bit more sort of they become sort of commercially minded, and just then after maybe 3 or 4 seasons everything makes sense. And I think without Man, I just think there'd be quite a few designers that we wouldn't see grow to that position.
But I think that's kind of like natural also to happen, because Man gives them a great opportunity to every designer that is on the show. And what happens is that normally they gain lots of stockists after that, and you know, lots of retail stores, you know, place orders. So that means that, you know, they start becoming from just being a designer to a viable brand. So that means that they've got money to perfect the production, or you know, to make the brand growing with putting the right people into the brand in terms of production, fabrics, and the whole vision of them starts becoming a bit more clear, because they get also a very important feedback from the retail point of view, from online point of view, and from excellent people around the industry, which you know, they pay attention to them and they start giving them advice with one or the other way. So I think this is what Richard says is absolutely true, because you see the growth from season to season, and you see brands that they start on season 1, and on the 3rd season they have become extremely strong and powerful, and they can carry on as a brand without the help and support of Man as they had it before that.
Do we have any favourite Man moments? Because obviously we could talk about this season, but does anyone remember going to particular Man shows that were really...
Carrie.
cassette player.
With Sonic. Yeah, the cassette player with Sonic. I just thought, I don't know why I always remember that. I guess, I don't know, often the shows can be quite serious and quite heavy.
Yeah.
And I just thought that show was just so mental that you just couldn't help but smile. And then when she came out at the end holding hands with Sonic the Hedgehog, you were just like, yeah, that's it, amazing.
I knew Pal Studio as well. There was a bit of
Yeah.
craziness in there that we all welcomed.
Yeah.
But it is, like you say, it is that platform, and having a small show in front of a kind of very big audience in some respects is quite daunting for those designers. But it allows them to make some mistakes. So I think everyone's it's great will with Man, and you kind of want them to succeed. And the worst thing you could have done is just sponsor them and put them out there on a big catwalk in front of an even bigger international audience potentially, and see them fail, because that would be awful for our industry. So to see them, as you say, over 2 or 3 seasons mature and understand the craft of their business is really encouraging.
And what do we think of the show this season? Because there were just 2 designers.
We only had 2,
this season. Because the first space was kind of the film. Tell us a bit about the designers.
Had 2 contrasting shows, I think, in Rory and then Liam, and I think Rory's was a continuation of kind of where he was quite constructivist, wasn't it, in some ways, and I think he handled that really well. But I mean, I don't know what anyone else would say about that, but I think my favourite of the 2, even though I like both, was Liam's. I kind of, maybe that's what I understand more. Like you were saying about collections that are there first or second time, and then you get them as they go on and they mature. But I thought I think this collection sort of nailed on the head what he had always seemed to be trying to do. And I think it kind of came together in a very mature way with all the prints and all the silhouettes. I thought it was really strong. And keeping it to that palette as well really helped.
And it's interesting going back to what you were saying, Julia, about kind of how we, the fashion pack, love LCM. But I think what's interesting about some of the designers that are coming through is there's a real drive and desire to speak beyond the fashion pack. And I think you really see that with someone like Liam. He is interested in kind of like what ordinary boys, it sounds like a cliche, want to wear. And I think that's actually quite exciting to see designers who aren't just looking for kind of like acclaim within a small set of people. They're not even looking to necessarily sell to the market that currently exists. They're trying to build something completely new and get a fan base that's really new. Do you stock Liam?
Yes, yes. And we have worked with Liam from basically, we started about like 1.5 years ago working with Liam. So I've seen kind of like that, what we describe all this time, about the progress, to see from the beginning and how this has been translated after like 3 seasons so far. And I completely agree with Gordon. I mean, that was one of the most standout collections, throughout the whole fashion week. He definitely managed to grow his collection, and the color palettes, the fabrics that he used, because this is a really great challenge for every designer, especially on the size of these emerging designers, is that based on how they think about, how I have to grow my brand in my next collection and what I have to build, sometimes most of them have to face a great challenge, which they're losing what basically and originally they became well known for and what people really liked on them. So it's this kind of transition where some designers don't know how to translate this message, and or they move really far away from what they became known for and what people loved by them, or sometimes they get criticized because they don't offer something new through the collections. And I think Liam is a great example that he managed to go through it, and he shows season by season that the brand takes the right direction and goes through the right way. And also from a buyer's point of view, because I know the pricing, and this is something I think important to talk about quite a lot of times with these designers, because eventually the aim is to sell in stores for all of them, is that he has worked extremely well his prices, and when you see that through the brands that prices are really reflecting the garments, then it's a great success, not only on a catwalk but also how it has been translated in terms of sales.
It's really interesting you say prices reflecting the garment, because I think to maybe some of our viewers that would seem really obvious. They'd say, well, why wouldn't the price reflect the garment? But that is a hiccup that often hits young designers, isn't it? When you look at something, you can't work out why something...
Yes.
Give me a bit of a backstory on that, if we've got any young designers watching.
I mean, it's a great challenge. I completely understand. I mean, whoever sees it, I mean, it's easy as that. You know, in order for you to work better price is when you sell your collections. You know, you have to have a good size of production, which means that you have to have a good size of orders from different stores, so you can work out prices with the factories you're working with the fabrics, with everything. So it is a catch-22, you know, where how you do that in such a short period of time. Yeah. So it's extremely difficult, and the designers that they manage to do that, I really salute them. I mean, it's extremely tough thing to do, but yes, it is true that, you know, you can see designers and you can see garments and collections which you absolutely love, and then when you see the line sheets, I mean, it's kind of scary in terms of a retailer, how he can take a challenge, because we are talking about emerging designers that they don't have such an established crowd, you know, and I'm not talking only about London right now, because in London all these designers are quite well known, but you know, we're talking also internationally in a very different point of view. So we have to think the markets, also we have to think the currencies, you know, they play quite a lot of, like, I mean, if they're selling, for example, in US, you know, how this translated with dollar, the same applies like to Asian markets. So all these are a lot of things to take into consideration. But I think overall, and now when I have kind of a good understanding of the pricing overall of the British designers, especially the emerging ones, I think that they're doing extremely well, and I think they have worked really hard, and I think British Fashion Council has helped them tremendously towards this direction, because they have built lots of pillars around them to support them and work with them and help them to achieve a good pricing as well.
So who in particular this season was getting it right? Who was doing all those things that we've kind of just touched on there? Who's doing really interesting collections, developing their aesthetic really clearly without sort of not moving on? Who's sort of selling really well? Who stood out? Who's great?
It's always a hard one to put your name out there first.
I mean, for me, it was Astrid Andersen. Yeah. Which you know, Astrid's another one of those that when she first started, I wasn't crazy about it. Yeah. And I think as she's gone on, I just think everything about her aesthetic just feels relevant. It feels really relevant, but unlike some of the other sort of streetwear designers, there's a real sort of, there's an intelligence to her approach, I think, that is it's not there with some of the other designers. I think you look at her work, and it's bold, and it's very street, but it's really clever. Yeah. And I don't know what it is. It just feels really refined, and for me, it's not something I would normally look at and be like, that's really my aesthetic, because it's quite the opposite actually. But you know, I saw this collection and I was just really impressed by it.
And she just knows her man really well, doesn't she? And that's the best thing when you go to a show. Just
the, you know, the fabrics, the silhouettes, the prints, everything is just everything was just really polished and sort of another level.
I think that whole chinoiserie thing that was part of this, wasn't it? All those oriental fabrics was rife across the whole of menswear this season, but we saw it here first, and actually I thought it was the most relevant here, because it was less of a pastiche, and it was taking that fabric. I think she woven in her little motive into that as well, and so the whole thing suddenly felt sort of young and modern and streety, as opposed to the other context that we saw it in across the season. So I actually agree with you. I thought this is one of her best collections in a long time. I thought it was fantastic. I love the silhouettes, and a bit like you know, I've warmed to her as the seasons have gone on, because she was way ahead of the curve in some respects, all those shapes and things that a lot of other designers have tapped into. But she made them her own from the very beginning, and I admire any designer who knows their market, knows their aesthetic, and sticks to it, but then just keeps growing it season on season, and you almost go to the show and come out and think, what was in that, oh yeah, and then you go back and there are so many things that she's changed quite subtly that make a huge difference.
Yeah.
And she's got great sales. She's developed good working relationships with the buyers, so she delivers on time. So she does. So her working practices are good as well. So I think we're going to see even greater things from Astrid going forward.
I think also what Astrid did, which I completely agree with both Gordon and Richard, is that I personally said that this is her best collection. You know, that I've seen after a long time, and the reason why was apart from all the rest, which I completely agree, is that there is like this massive debate with all the streetwear brands, you know, and they say how they're going to move on now that kind of like the trend changes and how they're going to translate. And she's a great example of what she has managed to do, and also it's about the branding and about the logo. And if you notice in some of these garments, you know, she did an extremely amazing work about using her logo and how she has translated her logo into applying it into the garments without being, you know, the typical in-your-face logo that we have used to have, you know, like in the previous seasons. So I think this is like a very it's a detail, but it's a very smart detail of how you translate your branding, which because there was a debate that what is going to happen to these designers that have built the whole collections around like big branding there, and she managed to do it in a very smart way, and fabrics and silhouettes, and she caught up into this oriental trend in a very extremely and smart way without losing her touch with her customers. So I think she did like an excellent job with that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to see this collection right before going off to all the international shows, because I wrote quite a lot about it, but there was this kind of like bizarre obsession with like talking about the East and all things Oriental, and it was so kind of like really kind of pastiche and embarrassing at some of the shows. And I was kind of reflecting why it did work so well here, and I wondered if it was just because I'd seen it first so it didn't feel so tired, but I realised it wasn't. It was because there's an authenticity to when she does it, because you do feel like she is speaking to a kind of a new audience or a global audience, and she's not about catering to that. It kind of goes back to what I was saying before. It doesn't feel like she's about catering to that typical luxury guy who's always kind of been targeted by the big brands. It feels like she's noticed that there's a group of people who are interested, who have the spending power, and has kind of made something to target them, and that's really refreshing, like carving out her own audience.
I agree, and also, you know, about this oriental trend, if we're talking about this right now, I think another one which was, for me at least, you know, an extremely positive surprise was Xander Chu. I think he did like a brilliant show. It was on the last day actually of London Collections, and he's a designer which, you know, he's extremely popular when it comes to China and Asia, and he's doing so extremely well, and he embraced this, and I think, you know, the international press actually said this about him, because he's originally from China, and he was saying that all this time he got criticized that he never embraced this kind of like this element, and he did that this season, but he did it in an extremely smart way. His collection was brilliant. I think he delivered the message extremely well. I think he's going to be one of really great designers that we're going to see growing in the next seasons. And he's working also with a great stylist, Lotta, who you can see throughout the show.
She does Gosha as well.
Yes, she does Gosha, and you can see that. You can see this because all these people, you know, it's good also to mention the team around them. You know, like for example, because they play such an important part to the collections that they're doing, you know. I mean, the same applies to Xander, the same applies to Astrid, you know. So they've got a great team of stylists that they're doing like excellent job for their brand, and this is very important to them as well.
You do have to work. You're absolutely right mentioning that, because a team is the most important thing, and if you have that team that you believe in, they help you build that collection right from word go. So the conversations right at the beginning of that collection is with that group of people, and they all enrich it. And I think it's a very good comment to make, because some of the good shows that are coming out are often because they have a very strong stylist in the mix, and perhaps that stylist has been with them a couple of seasons and helped them mature into what they're trying to do. Because as a designer, you get flooded with ideas and things, and there's so many different paths you can take on a collection.
And
a stylist can then take you off on yet another path, but that's fine too, because if you trust that person, then that path is probably the correct one. And then you just put the others on hold for, you know, either temporarily or forever, because they just weren't a good idea in the first place. And then you follow that path, and they help you build it and make sense of it and put it together in a way. I mean, I keep saying to the team at Topman, we could all style our show very differently, but you know, Luke Day comes on board and brings something new to it and styles it and helps us
like
make it look amazing and looks very different to how we would do it. So you know, it's thanks to him, and he becomes part of our team for that period of time. And I trust him implicitly.
I mean, I cannot think about like Astrid without Elgar, for example, because Elgar has done like an amazing show, not just for Astrid, I mean for like a number of menswear brands. The same thing applies because we're talking about Liam, you know, with Harry Lambert, you know, I mean, these stylists are extremely important, you know, when they come along, and they basically, as Gordon said, you know, a designer can do the collection, they are the people, but then a stylist is going to come along and edit it and say this is how it needs to be done, this is the strongest looks, this is how they need to go out in the catwalk. This is the most important thing, because you also know that from a magazine point of view.
I just think nowhere is it more evident than at JW Andersen.
Oh yes, yeah.
You know,
but there, I think it's not even a designer-stylist relationship there between Jonathan Anderson and Benjamin Bruno. I think it is more of a mesh.
But I think it's really interesting to look at JW Andersen before he started working with Benjamin, and just to see how much
it's changed.
That's changed.
But I do think credit to Jonathan. I feel like he is quite open about that,
and he does always give Benjamin necessary respect and credit.
What did we think of the JW Andersen
It was a great show.
Yeah, it's good.
I liked it.
Did you?
It was a great show, yeah.
What did we think of the weird mobiles that they were holding? Because they were holding these weird, like...
The bags.
Well, they weren't bags, they were like bits of metal.
Yeah. It was
so it was like a man bag, but like a mobile. I thought it was maybe like a nod to the like hot dad trend thing.
Did they do anything, these handbag mobiles?
No, they literally were like a mobile.
They were just decorative in some respects.
Yeah.
The future potential bag mobile then.
Yeah, it was really, really strange. There were some great
I didn't
posts.
see the press release. Was it in the press release? Did it say what any of them
No, he does these really cryptic. He doesn't really do press releases. He'll like do like a title or something like that. I think he talked of, what was it this season? It was like controlled experimentation. So it's that kind of thing where you're like, cool.
I think the whole vibe, at least, you know, what they told us in the showroom was basically, you know, what a teenage boy is about in his room. So basically, you know, and I think kind of like you can see the reflection to it, you know, about kind of like inspirations. Well, I think that it's great what Jonathan did with this show was that he moved very not extremely far away, but he changed the shapes from what we, you know, what is autumn winter is coming now in the stores, is now in the stores. With spring summer 16, the shapes are quite different in terms of like the trousers, and I mean the silhouettes went a bit bigger, you know, kind of like a bit more like oversized. But I think overall it was like a great show, a beautiful show, and I think the response to it has been very, very strong, actually.
I just think it's really nice to see him making some things that are actually wearable for normal people. You know, it's not to dismiss what he's done previously, but I just think this is a really big step forward. And it's almost like he's starting to get to grips with his aesthetic and how he can sort of marry that with some kind of wearability, and I'm sure a lot of that's come from his position at Loewe.
I was thinking a bit about sort of intellectualizing, and I think there's not many designers in London who are obsessed with doing that anymore. I think people are quite down to earth in London. They're quite like open about their inspirations. This is what it was about, this is what I was thinking about, and there's real pragmatism and kind of a modesty to what they do. And I don't think there are as many designers who operate like Jonathan, where there is this kind of like hyper, like, you know, those designers that everyone thinks are really smart, like Prada or Marni or Rei Kawakubo. Feels like he's aspiring to kind of do that whole thing, where it's like lots of, if you ask him what it was about, you're there for like 20 minutes, you're not quite sure what he said. Kind of, I love it. I think it's really engaging and there's a real space for it. But I find it interesting, I thought how rare that is in London, that doesn't seem to be as popular with the younger designers. Like you wouldn't see an Astrid doing that, you wouldn't see a Christopher Shannon doing that.
That's a good question.
Do you not feel that that's part of his charm?
Yeah, I do think it's part of it. I think he's made that his point of difference, hasn't he? Like, you know, these clothes wouldn't work unless you kind of come away from thinking, oh, there must be something about this that I'm not quite getting. Because it has to feel a bit lofty, otherwise you'd be like, what the hell is that? Like, do you know what I mean? It has to feel like a bit...
It does give it a good framework.
It does.
Because I always initially find them really hard, his collections hard to digest. Because they are very, very eclectic. A lot of designers will follow a theme through and you can see the logic of it as it progresses through the collection and the colour and then the print. He's kind of stabbing all over the place, and it's afterwards when you go away you suddenly realise there's some good pieces and then B, some good silhouettes, and like you say, some commercial things as well, which is always, I don't know how because commercial is always seen frowned upon as a really dirty word, but commercial just means you sell your clothes to an audience that you understand. So that's all commercial is, and often designers are frightened of that very word. So you could ultimately say his collection's really commercial because he understands the audience he's trying to sell it to. But it is very, very eclectic. It's always very eclectic. I mean, I think apart from shoes, that was the only bit of continuity throughout the whole show.
I think shoes and trouser shape.
The buckle patent shoes.
Yeah, trouser shape, he'll often really like blitz it with a trouser.
Yeah, but then he has fun with the tops, doesn't
he? Exactly. Yeah. I think it's also interesting, I do think that kind of sense of, I always find his collections very British. I don't know why, which sounds strange because Benjamin is obviously not British French, but I think there's something kind of about like English eccentricity and English perversion in what he does, particularly the early stuff when it was a bit fetishy. And that's quite, I do find that quite interesting to see, and I thought that bit this season where it was all about kind of like this nerdy boy and the stuff in his room, and I do kind of like those kind of stories. I think he's an interesting designer. Yes. Julia, who was your favourite? Who stood out to you?
I don't go to all the shows, I have to say.
You pick and choose.
I really enjoyed Lou Dalton's show, actually. What I'm really enjoying about menswear, actually, there's this really big sort of feminine sort of moment with the way that designers are thinking about how to dress the modern man.
Yeah.
You know, with Astrid Andersen, quite floaty. Those prints are very feminine, in fact. And so, do you think there's a sort of new kind of feminine butch man going around?
I think there is, because there's two kinds of femininity, isn't there? There's the kind of thing that's happening at Gucci. Where it's like really androgynous and very fey and foppish. But then there's that kind of like butch femininity, putting it, which you see with like Astrid Andersen and kind of with people like Nazir sometimes as well, which is interesting. But I think it's interesting you mentioned Lou, because I think she always manages to pull, I think Lou's work is so subtle, so she'll kind of like nod to those things, like with the shears and stuff, and you always feel like she has her eye on what's going on, but it's not as prominent in her work. She'll kind of do it very subtly.
I liked her sort of the function going on as well, like these really good sort of pockets on things, and so there was a sort of an idea of things actually functioning in the real world.
I think it was interesting as well because that sweater in the middle, the kind of ravey sweater, and she did talk about like there was a bit of that notion of like moving to a city and going out, and I thought it was quite interesting how many designers in London did that this season. Like Chris Shannon was obviously all like foam parties, Magaluf, and then there's quite a big focus on like club culture, but not kind of club culture as we know it, like not the kind of like Gareth Pugh kind of club thing, not Lee Bowery, but kind of like more kind of laddie club culture, which I thought was quite interesting to see. That was exciting.
Well, I agree with you. I did really like Lou's collection as well. And I think sometimes Lou gets it so nearly close to, it's like her aesthetic is so nearly there, and I think this season she really sort of hit it. And I love the fact that she did a collaboration, didn't she, with a mill of some sort of description to get those fabrics, some of those swirling sort of ginghams, and then the fabrics are quite straightforward as well. You've got the prints of Wales, you've got the transparency, and you've got great colour going on. And I love the fact she brought back the cargo pant. You know, and that's kind of like brave.
Exactly.
Because that's a world away of like, we don't want to wear that anymore. We don't want to go anywhere near it. We've seen it everywhere. But for somebody to bring it back, but then make it look so desirable that you think, I can't believe I'm thinking I might want to wear a cargo pant. And I think she did that terrifically well. And I always love the way she balances colour and pulls the whole collection together. And it was all about pockets and function. And there were times when perhaps there were too many to see the good in them, but I thought it was a great collection. Of course, it's very well styled as well by Julia, so you kind of get that good combination.
When you say you felt like she was always kind of right near to nailing her aesthetic, what would you say her aesthetic is? Because that's the tricky thing with Lou in a sense, because she's not the shoutiest designer, and I think her clothes are kind of...
When you say of J.W. Andersen, Britishness, I think it is that Britishness. It's like that new Britishness, and that how you can describe that as an aesthetic, I don't know, and that's probably what's quite difficult each season. But they're very quiet clothes in some respects, and you wouldn't, you know, if you're casually observing that, you wouldn't say that because it's got the bright orange and the ginghams and the things. But if you strip it back and you take those elements out, some of that collection is just very, very straightforward and very desirable, and it has nice new details and finishes. So. I just think she hit it well this season.
Oh, I like these trapeze parkery shapes.
She did a lot of those sort of A-line shapes.
I think she sort of bridges that sort of tailoring aesthetic into sort of streety, sort of casual looking type of man, which is kind of interesting as well. You can see that she comes from a tailoring sort of background.
She knows how to construct clothes.
And it is nice to look at something where you feel like it has a real relevance outside of fashion, and that's one of the things that sometimes, you know, you'll see a collection and it's brilliant. And Alex Fury actually wrote a good piece about this, about Christopher Shannon's collection, and I thought Christopher Shannon's collection was brilliant and beautiful, but it was so about kind of masculinity and real life and boys and what they do, but then a lot of the pieces in that kind of ironically perhaps would scare like an ordinary blokey shopper, whereas Lou's wouldn't. But I did think this was a fantastic collection.
You say that, but I don't think it does scare an ordinary
shopper.
In some respects, because you could say some of Lou's things could scare an ordinary shopper because they got lots of pockets and things on. This is stripped down of that, and some of these pieces is just about proportion and all that zipping and the tie. I really like this.
It's lovely, isn't it? Look at those trousers.
Also, you know, from I mean, we experienced one thing that we have only experienced before with Nazir, actually, which basically have customers walking the store and requesting to pre-order pieces from the next season.
Really? From Nazir?
From Nazir and from Christopher Shannon. So basically these two denim outfits with like the extra large shapes of like the trousers and the cut out denim jackets on the back. And we're saying, okay, you know, we're ordering them. So, you know, like you can wait like for a season. They were like, no, we cannot lose them. We need like to have them. So, you know, it's Christopher is doing an absolutely brilliant job, because it's one of these brands that I think commercially is, because apart from, and I'm not talking only as a buyer from a Chine, I'm talking about because I have lots of friends that are buyers around, so, and internationally as well for big stores, and we always meet in Paris and in London, and we're talking about like performance of brands, and everyone always commenting how well Christopher Shannon is doing. So because he's one of these brands that price-wise, he really understands the market. You will never hear someone saying, "Oh, this is too expensive," or this doesn't reflect the price. So he does like something extremely nice, good qualities. It's clothes that actually you can wear all the time, and really people do appreciate his brand, and I think. Yeah, and I think it's really smart what he does. I think he's the dream for the buyers, actually.
It has a good cross section of things you can buy. Just going back to those ones with all the strips. So you could buy that in its entirety, and actually another store in another street, so to speak, could have a completely different take on that collection and have a different audience. And I think that is incredibly difficult to achieve as a designer, because sometimes you're selling to one outlet, and then another one will go, "Oh, if you've sold there, we won't buy it." But I think, with regards to this, it has so many sort of
well, it's like edited, but it's meaty as well.
Yeah, it's great.
And I think this is the route where most of retailers, and I think that reflects the designers as well, going to, because obviously, as Gordon really rightly said, I mean, exclusivity or competition it's quite a big thing, not just in London. I mean, Hong Kong is extremely tough. I mean, I think it's way harder than what it is in London, for example. But in New York as well, the same applies to New York. So you know, designers, you know, cannot grow only from one place. even if it's the best shop in the world, you know, they cannot grow only from one shop. So now what, you know, it's good to do is, you know, to offer a big variety in your collection where, you know, different styles can go to different stores, and then so you keep everyone happy basically, pretty much, from the stores.
It's so hard to do that. It goes back to what we're saying, isn't it, without losing your kind of unique point of view.
Yeah, but also, you know, stores, it doesn't mean that, you know, what is going to be a bestseller for one store is going to be a bestseller for another store, you know, because each store has different customer bases. So as long as, you know, you don't, your message and your aesthetic is throughout the whole collection, then, you know, different stores are picking up different things. I mean, even if it's like, I think it's a great example, like designers like Craig Green, for example, you know, like that you see a collection and then you think that every store would go for the same pieces, and that's not the rule, you know. If you go like in Dover Street, or if you go in Matches, or if you go like to his rest of the stock keys, you're going to see that, you know, different selections have been made from a brand where, you know, you think, oh, you know, how is it? It's not really a massive variety through it, but actually it is, you know, because when you start like digesting all the outfits, then you understand that, you know, actually there is quite a lot of different styles to pick up.
What did we all think of the Craig Green show? Because there was some interesting commentary around it. I think some people thought he hadn't done something that was different enough. Some people really loved that he hadn't kind of bowed to that pressure of just kind of like pointlessly changing up. What did everyone think?
Well, I came out of it thinking, oh, he hasn't changed very much. But then afterwards, I absolutely loved it. It was kind of a weird thing. I think it is. We're having this kind of ongoing conversation about continuity and how you build a brand and how you then become commercial within it. I mean, it's his livelihood. He's got to sell clothes, and he's a true master of understanding his brand, though, isn't he? And you could argue that hadn't moved on, but if you actually go back and look at it, and look at the way it's styled and how it's constructed, it has moved on. It's moved on incredibly subtly, but it's still every bit as beautiful as all his other collections. And I guess perhaps I kind of went to it, and I think I read something about it. I thought, oh, we're going to see sort of like embroideries or something this season, so we're going to see Craig Green embroidered, or something went on in my head. And then it came out and it wasn't that. I felt immediately, oh, okay. And so it took me a while to get into the show, but I think it, you know, those colour hits, that green, I really, really loved it. And I can see it doing incredibly well. And then putting women in the show as well, I thought that was like, there is an audience for that.
It is.
And you going back to that, menswear, women's wear, that sort of where it's the divide on that, or where it's crossing over, I think was really important. There's some beautiful silhouettes.
His stuff works.
He just so knows how to construct clothes.
Yeah, he really does.
And I can imagine him poring over every detail. A bit like Lou, actually. I didn't mention that. I always imagine Lou sewing her collection, but, you know, like sort of about a week before, because Lou's so into like every single detail. And I think Craig's the same. Yeah,
he's so particular, isn't he? He has such a clear... I think the women were an interesting addition, because I spoke to him and I think he really ummed and ahed about putting them in, and he was like, oh, a week before we weren't going to do it, and then we decided to do it. And there are a lot of women on the runways at LCM, which partly is a commercial thing, you know, to kind of give your resort like a bit of a push, but I think it's exciting to see him put them in there, especially because his clothes they work great on women. You know, I wear his stuff and the fit works brilliantly on women, because you can like pull it all in and stuff, like you can make it fit your body.
And also Craig is doing something extremely specific. So I think he's one of the more, not just me, I think, you know, everyone thinks about that, and it's great thing to believe as well, is like he's one of the great designers of this generation, because what he's managed to do is extremely important. I mean, he's got something that it's not, when you first see it, it's not the most, you think that it's not the most commercial thing, and then actually if you see the success that he's got commercially, and it is a brand that you saw everyone wearing like around, and this is a testament, it is a testament of, you know, how people react to it. I think he's going to go massive, and everyone knows this, and he has to be true to what he believes, because this is what Craig is. I mean, you know, and he's doing it extremely well, and he always suggests a bit new portions, but actually he cannot like live completely away from what he has been known for, and and he still is establishing his character. You know, I mean, like, it's too soon for everyone to expect for all these designers to move away.
Just so high expectations on him.
I always say that you should be extremely grateful and lucky in the whole worldwide audience of so many different brands and designers. If people can remember you, like your name with a garment, and I'm not talking just about London, I'm talking internationally. That is super important. You shouldn't run away from it. You should embrace it, and you should become established through this amazing thing that you've managed to do.
Because it is so true. Think how many young designers you could say their name and then immediately say what they're about. I think there's very few, and it's interesting with Craig, you can immediately distill his aesthetic, and it's funny, it's a very different designer, but it's also interesting given that they just won the big GQ Fashion Fund prize is eTorts, where you can kind of also do that. It's very different, but you just like massive trousers. Like, you can do that same thing, but it's interesting to. Were we all happy that that Patrick Grant and eTorts won that grant? Because obviously it's a huge amount of money, and they were up against real stiff competition. Like, they were up against Astrid Andersen and
Sibling.
What's that? Matthew Miller as well.
Matthew was that.
Yeah.
And Christopher Rayburn.
Exactly. What was everyone's thoughts?
What, on the show or winning the prize?
Both.
That's controversial. No, I don't know. I think well, it's obviously well deserved, because I don't know the background to that, but I know they have to do lots of documentation. They have to put forward everything on business plans and things. And so, not being part of that, you'd have to say that it was a well-deserved win for Patrick, because understandably he produced something, and the documentation and his brand and everything was great. I actually really like the show. It's very simple. It's a completely different aesthetic to what we've just been looking at. And there were just 3 or 4 very simple ideas, I thought, and fabrications that were taken through. And it's very stylish. And imagine him wearing it.
I completely agree with you. I think after all the madness of the men's collections, I felt like it was really refreshing to see the show. And I came out of it thinking I'd actually love to have most of that show. It's like it just felt really nice to see things that were really well cut and well tailored and you know, wearable. You know, it's not to say that there's not a place for everything else. There really is, but it's just nice to then go in and see a show like eTorts and be like, oh yeah, actually, people in London, you know, can do wearable stuff too.
And
make
can
it
do
look
stuff
really
like
nice.
His focus is so different. Things like buying the factories and trying to like support kind of manufacturing. It's just a completely different beast, and I think that's interesting to see it existing alongside other stuff that's existing.
But I think there's a lot of snobbery still in fashion, and I think unless you're doing like groundbreaking sort of, you know, stuff like Craig Green, and you know, unless you're really pushing the envelope, I think people tend to sort of look down their nose a little bit, and I think there's a lot to be said for actually just getting a really nice pair of trousers.
It's, I would say, it was unassuming modern perfection.
Oh, that's very.
But I think, but you need this. It's that balance, isn't it? You're right. If you only had 20 Craig Green shows, then it wouldn't be a great representation of all this amazing talent in the UK. So having Patrick in the mix, doing this kind of things, which is that refined elegance that, yes, it may not be your thing, but you have to respect how well it's done. We need that.
And it's nice to see it from a kind of young emerging talent, because you have, like, we all go to the Burberry show and we sit there and you kind of have that strange thing of you've just been at like Nazir or Astrid and then you're sitting at a Burberry show. But it's nice to see that someone who's kind of still coming up and coming out can do that wearability, that luxury just as well, because otherwise it does feel like the young kids doing the young cool stuff and then the big brands doing the really wearable stuff. So it's nice to see that kind of conversation.
I agree.
Yeah. There's someone we haven't spoken about, which was a really, I think, probably the most shocking show of LCM, which was Sibling.
I love Sibling. I think last time I was doing this, we didn't quite get to talking about Sibling,
no,
so I'm really happy
you talking about Sibling. Because Sibling was so funny actually to look at those first 3 looks, because it started and it like truly lulled you into a false sense of security. Obviously they really did, and then you won't be able to see from the catwalk looks. But
I was quite excited, but I thought, wow, they're really going to do something. Well, they did in the end, but I mean, but just from that beginning, I thought it was going to go off in a completely different direction. But oh, there's some great pieces in this. And
I
love the fact that they will always put a smile on your face. You know, they're going to do a great collection. They understand knitwear. That's what I love about it. It's a craft in itself, and there isn't anything that those three they don't know about knitwear. So you know, however crazy or however subdued the show was going to be, it would still be amazing based on their skills. So I thought it was really good fun, this collection.
I wouldn't agree more. You know, I mean, it was a great show, and the thing is with Sibling is that they, you know how they always have fun in the show, and the people that they go in the show have fun as well. But when you see the collection in a showroom or in a store actually later on, they're always pieces to buy. They're always extremely well made. They apply to a really big audience as well, they knitwear, and also they have chosen a path which is extremely tough and extremely difficult. Knitwear is the biggest challenge for the designers. It's a very, very tough place to be, price-wise, you know, production-wise, in every sort of way, and they have managed to do this season by season by season, and it's a great testament to and the three of them, that they're doing an excellent job. They do understand London, but they do understand the international market as well, and people actually love them, you know, and customers do love the clothes, and they have fun, and it speaks to lots of different type of customers.
I think as well, you know, as Stavros was saying, they're so savvy. And I read a couple of reviews that were like, oh, you know, it's too novelty, it's all showpieces, it's not going to translate. But they're on it. They do a complete, you know, they have completely different pieces to take to the showrooms. They're not going to be trying to flog you know, the knitted jockstrap. You know, they have like a really serious business, and they take to the table what they think is going to sell. And this is, you know, this for us in the industry is like amazing light relief.
I mean, this is the theatre to their craft, isn't it? And that's the way I look at it. And actually, as their shows have progressed, their shows have got better as well. Whereas before it was perhaps, whoa, it was a crazy show, adding some. Actually, the combination and the silhouettes and proportions are all pretty, you know, they're as they should be. So it makes a great show to watch. So suddenly you forget you're only looking at predominantly knitwear. You're actually looking at a great show as well, and that's incredibly clever to pull off. And
that
master,
is really true.
It's really, really difficult.
And there was the hairy crack. And I was sat opposite this one at the shows, and she was laughing so much that I couldn't stop laughing.
I just couldn't stop. Like, I just found, I don't know why, it was just so, like, I love that, like, we all act like we're so, like, liberal and conceptual, and all it takes is, like, a bare bum, and everyone goes mental.
Audible gasps at the show.
I just found it so funny, I don't know why. It was just because it was, like, right there. It's fabulous.
It was funny though.
Yeah. Well, everyone laughed, and what I thought was so brilliant about it was that everybody just came out of the show just still smiling. And I think it's really nice that their show has been put to the end of the day now, whereas before it always used to be first thing on Saturday morning. And actually, now that it's at the end of the day, when everyone's feeling a bit tired, everyone's like, Sibling, come on, let's go.
Because that was really funny. I went backstage to say hi to her, Cosette from Sibling, and I was like, oh, were all the boys okay with like getting their bums out? Because not all of them had, but a lot of them did. And she was like, yeah, she was like, we kind of like told them in advance, like certain ones. And she was like, before they went out, they were all like comparing. They were like, does this look all right, mate? And they were like helping each other out. Like, it was really
and well, I think, you know, there always seems to feel like a big family around Sibling, and there's just so much love for them in the industry. But I think what a lot of people won't know is that you really get that sense backstage as well. You know, they have almost a little family of models now that they have guys that they really love, and they book every season. And some of them actually request, like they request their agents to get in touch with Sibling so they can do the Sibling show again.
It's nice to see. I also think it's interesting to talk about that notion of family around Sibling, because it goes back to their roots in the industry, and like, you know, the work that like, particularly like Sid has done like for knitwear for other houses. It's like, it makes sense that they have such a family, because you forget how many amazing pieces that you've seen at like, I don't know, Giles or wherever, that were kind of masterminded by like Sibling. So I think that's really interesting as well. It's always nice to see them kind of have their own platform.
I think the other show for me that I was really impressed by. I mean, I think there's still a lot of growth to happen, but I thought Bobby Abley was really strong.
Yeah, I don't have Bobby Abley images, I'm afraid, but tell us why you liked it.
Well, I just think, it was his first runway show, and he has this ongoing fascination with Disney, which I personally am quite obsessed with as well. And, I wouldn't say that his shapes or anything are particularly groundbreaking, because they're not. But what I was really impressed with was the quality of his clothes, and the humour of it. This season he took Star Wars as his inspiration, and we've all. I guess for me, I'm a little tired of all this slogan streetwear everywhere, and I thought he took sort of slogans and pushed them forward in another way. So he worked more with just iconic imagery, but really put his own twist on it and had fun with it. And I just think it was quite clever for somebody so young, for their first show, to come up with that. It felt strong, really strong.
I think it's interesting. I think the young designers who are coming up now, who are doing stuff that is a bit different, I thought that particularly at Fashionista, like you were talking about, saying so much about kind of like the logos and the branding, and then again at Fashionista there was just as much focus on identity and kind of like standing for something, but it was like totally different. Like we're seeing Charles Jeffrey here, and then there was like Grace Wells Bonner as well, and I think it is it's a similar thing. It's like having obsessions, whether it's the Disney thing or club culture as with Charles Jeffrey, but using it to create something that's not as kind of like name focused, and I think that's very interesting. I think. Sorry, go ahead.
I think Wells Bonner was one of the best things I saw at the men's shows in London. I knew very little of her work, I have to admit, and I just went along because we were there, and I went along to see it, and I went in sort of not knowing anything, because I'd not really been aware of her work, and I literally was sort of really impressed by what she produced, and I actually went and found her. I was like, who's this girl? I was like, I need to speak to her, I need to tell her how amazing it is. And I was just really impressed, and I thought for new talent, it was an amazing show.
I think she's really interesting, isn't she? Just because I think the fact that her work is so authentic, and she explores things that are so personal to her, but also so important as well. Like to see someone actually like properly investigating and putting kind of like black culture on a runway that isn't kind of like appropriating it in this kind of like cringy way. I just think it's amazing, and there's so much thought and like emotion. Emotion. There's all the intellectualizing, but there's like genuine emotion. Are you a big fan of what she's doing?
I love what she does. I can't get enough of it, to be fair. I just sort of love her sort of the mood she creates. Really overall, and then when you look at the individual pieces, they're very well constructed, very wearable, and there is that sort of dandified element going on that I adore, obviously.
I think going back to what Gordon said earlier about when you take young designers, often it's quite important to give them presentations first. And I know she's been around for a few seasons, and I really felt like just going into this, having, as I said, not really known much about her, there was such a confidence in this presentation that it feels like she's almost ready to take the next step.
Well, I was thinking you could imagine straight away, and it's interesting what you say about that kind of the dandified element, the decorative elements. I can imagine what her perfume would look like and smell like. I can imagine what her store would be like. I'm sure like if she actually did it, it'd be different, but I can imagine her having those things and them making sense, and that's really rare with a young designer, where you know what their identity is so clear.
But then it goes back to what Stavros was saying, that if you can do a show and somebody actually remembers your aesthetic, you've sort of you've made it.
Absolutely.
It's just though it's a bit different situations here, because when I mean, Grace is amazing. Even if you consider that she graduated about like a year ago from Celestial Martins through a BA, it's a great thing what's happening, and she has like such a distinct vision and everything. I mean, and she's what I respect on her. It's more about I think, you know, what she does is like something very, very unique in terms of, it's very challenging, you know, if you think about like the shapes, and if you think about the fabrics, and if you think about everything, you know, it could be something that could be very, very difficult, you know, in terms like of sales and everything. However, you know, like she's up for the challenge, and she's got a very specific vision, you know, who she needs like to take to the next step, which I'm pretty sure she's going to, given the fact that now she's on Fashionista, and you know she's going to have all the right people around her to talk to her how she's going to move forward. But it's a challenging, you know, step. It's not an easy step to take. You know, when you think that it's something so specific.
Yeah, and she's at that awkward point, isn't she, where like, and a lot of designers talk about this point where like press have fallen in love with you and you're so hyped, but then like you need the kind of like Thomas Tate once was like, told me that he was like, I got to a point where my press was like here and my actual buy was like there. But I think that's the problem that faces so many designers, where it's like how you actually make those things balance out a little 100%. Bit and get adequate support.
There'll be a point in time when that all gels really well. And I think, listening to what everyone's saying, ultimately she's proven that she can design very well and can construct clothes very well and make clothes very well. So all of that's kind of now a bit of a given. Yeah. So when it's the right time to do the show, which is probably pretty soonish, those elements will already be there. Do you know what I mean? She's not struggling to try and find out how to make the clothes and make them look good. She already knows that. Yeah. So, which is, it sounds really obvious. Which I know that's what I heard myself say that, and I thought that I'm saying something so completely obvious.
No, but I think it's a really smart point to make, because actually it sounds really obvious, but there's a lot of designers where that is the problem, where they have an identity, but it's struggling to pull together a cohesive collection with good, desirable clothes in it, and I think that does happen. I think we saw that for a while with Aggie and Sam, and I think it was really nice this season that it felt really strong again.
It did feel strong this season.
It really did, but then you had that kind of awkward period where that given, you know, that she can construct great clothes and they make a great desirable collection. Actually, a lot of designers sometimes they can't do that, and that's the problem. You get what they're trying to do, but this did feel strong, which was nice.
For me, I just felt Aggie and Sam coming back together again, using their two strengths collectively. I think sometimes maybe one stronger than the other, one collection. I don't know the ins and outs, but this one felt like it was very cohesive. Yeah. And they were both working together and producing really nice things. They're very simple again. Yeah. That sort of painterly stripe I thought was lovely. That kind of pyjama dressing towards the end, I think. I
liked it because they're both quite like well-dressed boys, and it looked like clothes they'd wear.
Yeah, it looked more akin to them. Yeah, you're right. Actually.
So you're just, I was like, other cool blokes will want to dress like that. Whereas other collections, I didn't believe that either of them would want to wear those clothes.
A bit more conceptual. Yeah, this one was more straightforward. But by straightforward, it's still good.
Yeah.
And very nice colour in there as well. They're very good at colour. Always.
Is there anyone? There's a lot of people we haven't talked about. We haven't talked about McQueen, which was a collection that didn't get that sort of favourably reviewed, but obviously it's important to have like a really like big brand as part of showing in London collections. It's always really exciting.
I didn't actually see it. I mean, I've seen it online. I wasn't. I don't know.
It was a strange collection.
It was relentlessly that one theme, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like the sea and tattoo prints and. It's a criticism that you can apply to the younger designers. I think my problem for it is I can't quite place who the McQueen man is, and then I think that's felt a bit weird to see looking at it. But is there anyone else we've missed? We haven't talked about James Law. Who do you want to talk about?
Oh my God, I want to talk about two actually. One is Kotweiler and the other one is Nazir Mazhar, because in terms of like those two is specific, because Kotweiler I think it's
like exploded.
It's the best thing that is happening right now in London in this kind of like underground, which becomes very vivid. I mean, and I know the brand very well, and I know the guys, but also I know the feedback that they're getting in terms of customers. They are going to be the next big thing that is happening for London for sure in this culture. They're doing like something extremely important, and they're doing something extremely well. They've got a really dedicated following, and I'm not just talking about like London. I'm talking about it's an international audience as well, which they are doing something extremely important. And I think it was a great thing for New Gen to offer them the opportunity to have a presentation. And also it's as we said about Grace, the guys are extremely good example of showing that a presentation actually can be so nice for a specific brand, and I think they did like an excellent presentation. They've got a great understanding of, you know, commerciality and uniqueness. It's one of these brands that when you see in the street, you know immediately there's Scott Weiler, and they are extremely appealing to a really, really big audience.
It's exciting, isn't it? People love it, which is cool.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to talk about. You said you want to talk about them and Nazir, but I feel like they kind of they fit in a similar category, but there's such differences between what they do as well, which is interesting. You can see it because I feel like in a way people like Nazir kind of opened up that category, and now it's so complex and there's so many people doing. You know, a lot of reporters are like, oh, they're streetwear guys, and you're like, but actually there's so many differences between all of them.
And I think however that Nazir has been one of the first. Or if not the first one actually to get into this vibe, and you know, it's when we talk about originality, and when we talk about this whole world, you know, Nazir is always the one that comes first in my mind, because you know Nazir has been the original designer doing this, and he has managed to grow his brand in a way. Again, that goes back to what we're talking about Astrid with, you know, the branding and everything, and you know how things change when it comes down to that. And you saw a collection where, you know, it had almost no branding at all on it. It's something that has been criticized a lot, you know, in Towers until his last season. And I'm sure Nazir didn't do that because he was criticized. He did it because he moves to the next step. And also, you know, that was he started producing, you know, his caps, and everyone knows that. I mean, apart from his clothes, which are extremely popular, you know, his hats has become one of the best-selling items for all the stores, you know, like, I mean, you walk down and you see so many people wearing his hats. Now he's producing shoes, you know, so for next season, you know, the shoes have been like brilliant, beautiful, and I think they're going to go down the same road as his hats. You know, they're going to become a really massive item. And for me as a buyer and someone that sells Nazir, of course, I was thinking about, okay, you know, what happens with these designers that, yes, you've got like the bully cup that everyone is asking about, but you know, you've got this, and you know, you're selling it. How is going to move to the next level? You know, like, I mean, if you got like one cup, you're not going to come and buy it again. So who is going to be the new customer for his? Well, they don't stop. You know, there are more people wanting and wanting and wanting, and you know, that's something very, very important. It's also a brand where he stopped, because in one point Nazir was doing between menswear and womenswear. Now you see that all his womenswear have been into the menswear catwalk, and I think it has to do pretty much to what we were saying before about girls buying into menswear brands and wearing the clothes is the same audience. So they would buy easily between men's and women's, and I think it was a great move for him to put the women's into the men's and show it all at once.
Do you find that Machine, a lot of people who come in to buy women's wear end up buying menswear pieces as well?
It's not just Machine. I mean, since we opened, you know, for us, you know, which I really don't like. I mean, like the whole gender agenda and, you know, like this kind of situation, I find it like very funny for me, you know, like even, you know, to mention that, you know, it was never about gender, and it was never about, you know, specify the agenda situation. You know, this is kind of like funny to me, you know, to think about it. It's a whole world of it, you know. The girls are going to buy into the menswear, and because menswear, you know, if we want to accept it or not, is way more interesting right now from women's wear. So this is why this is happening, you know, for all this period of time. You know, I mean, there are like all these amazing women's wear brands, but people are not really excited about, even women are not really excited about. When I speak to my girlfriends and when I speak to girls that I really appreciate the style and everything, and I ask them which was your favorite women's wear brand, they all struggling to reply back to me, and I know these girls are like...
Even the exciting big women's wear brands, the people at them are menswear designers like Raf Simons, JW Anderson, that's Eddie Slimane, that's interesting, isn't it? It's like boys are just sadly. Like.
And they're coming and they want like to buy, you know, into menswear. But this is not only to us. I think it's like an overall thing with all these brands is that you know, girls want to buy into that because it's not anymore any kind of like distinction in shapes or anything like this. So.
Have I missed anyone else? Is there anyone else that is really great that we should talk about?
We didn't do James, and I did like James. I did really like James's. I think it's all about fabric and texture and things for James, isn't it? I think he's like a textile designer at heart, and everything else stems from that. Because then I was looking at these a while back actually and thinking, how has he constructed some of those fabrics? Because I actually don't know, because I didn't see them up close, but they're amazing. But even that denim little zip up bottom is fabulous, where it's just all those 3 or 4 tones of washed denim put together really commercially. I thought it was a great collection. It was something to do with Brighton Pavilion, wasn't it? And slightly psychedelic and
but there was another one where it was
on
a
beaches
bit,
and things.
But
I thought it was very him. I love that middle outfit. I thought that was super nice and really commercial. I think it's a printed denim, but it's sort of somehow, and it's got the stripes on the side. Yeah, I loved it.
Were you a big fan, Princess Julia?
Oh yes. Yeah, and I particularly liked, James Davison's the way that sort of the illustration element creeps in to James's work as well. It's really interesting. And actually, it's a bit of a fashion clashing, isn't it, really? Because who could you, when you're in the mind of James Long,
it's a dark place.
No, it isn't. It's a bright and colourful place, but it's a lot of patternage, isn't it, going on? But it actually does work. It does work, and all the layering. There's a sort of dressing gowny number with a bit of a, blouson-y jacket over the top, and it all sort of works actually somehow.
It was interesting to see. It kind of goes
chic.
Yeah, it does. It did look very put together. It's interesting with that thing we were talking about, kind of the escapism that we saw in some of the other runways, like Richard, obviously your forte is so much to do with like clubbing and club culture. Why did you think so many people were kind of looking at kind of like, like youth and like going out, like we were saying Chris Shannon with the phone party, Lou Dalton, like why did it feel so now? Big question, sorry.
No, I think everyone's just bored. I think everyone's bored of all this austerity and people just want to look to like, happier times, I think, I mean, who knows? It just feels right, doesn't it? You know, I think particularly that sort of mid to late 90s just feels very much the zeitgeist, and everybody seems to be referencing that period right now,
Well, I think fashion had got very severe, hadn't it? It's like to be chic, you had to be like, it's kind of that Celine thing where everything had to be like so perfect, and it's kind of like normcore, like perfect sweater, perfect trousers, and there's not much fun in that. And it was interesting that no one in London was really doing that at all. Like it wasn't really about polished or the garment being, the perfect cut. It was more about it being kind of lived in and worn and having a story.
Oh yeah, sort of slung together like Charles Jeffries.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was very much about clothes worn.
But that was really interesting, and I think that sort of whole club culture in London, it's so London. That's the spirit of London. That people come here for the streetwear, for that sort of like twist on something that's gone before. It makes it sort of super exciting and sort of moves everything along. And I think that's why people look towards London, because we're so known for that sort of purity. Really, it's a very sort of pure kind of thought. And kind of naive in a way. Yeah.
No, you're right.
But not ill-considered.
Yeah.
I think also really it's a bit more said. It's like when you're in the business of fashion, it is a business. And as a young designer, if you're 2 or 3 seasons in or a couple of years in, you're trying ultimately to sell clothes, otherwise you wouldn't be in existence. So there's all of that part of it, and that tends to be the non-fun thing for a designer. It tends to be the one thing they'd really rather not do, but know they have to. And if they have a good business partner, they can let them do it. So quite straightforwardly, you go back to the things you remember as being the joyous things in your life and the things that inspired you, and actually were probably the triggers to what makes you do the things you do now. So I think a designer will often go back and look at those kind of reference points and think, God, that was a great time, that was great, I remember people dressing well, I remember this. but we're in a different day and age, so if I were to reuse those elements, how do I do it? And I think that's what keeps it all going. We're always referencing things. You can't do this without some sort of reference point. Otherwise you just have a very sort of static brand that's always going to do the same black t-shirt, or you're not going to do anything new. So you have to find reference points. So going back to the things you loved will always be a good starting point.
I think as well, we used to be so inundated with like street style and sort of club photography, but I think because so many of the good clubs in London are just shutting down, we see less and less of this. You know, there was a time when, you know, back in the MySpace days, or even before, you know, back, you know, in the mid-90s, you know, you'd always pick up a style mag and there'd be club pictures, a club section, or, you know, when I was
co-commercialised now.
Exactly, and you know, everything felt so exciting. Yeah, you're right, and I just think you don't really see that so much now, and I think maybe that sort of somehow
it's that kind of like
fueling this trend.
Well, it's like nostalgia, but it's like progressive nostalgia, isn't it? Like people like want things to be better by looking a bit back. Should we give everyone a round of applause to wrap this?
I would just like to say though as well, because I don't think it gets the credit that it deserves. I think the Topman show every season is always really strong.
I want really to say the same thing.
I always don't want to talk about Topman because I always think everyone's going to hate.
But I think it's really important, and you know, again, just because it's a high street store, and you know, it has to have an element of commerciality to it. I just think when you see this as a show sent down the runway, really well styled, you know, the casting, everything about it is always really, really strong. And I just think often it's overlooked because people think, oh, it's Topman.
I also think Topman runs through every element of LCM. We've said this before, but like the support and stuff that goes to designers from Topman, it's an important shout out to give, definitely.
But I just think you look at the clothes, it's amazing.
This collection was absolutely brilliant. I mean, congratulations, honestly.
It's a team.
It's a team. It's a team. But
and it shows.
I was thinking about this morning, actually, coming here, and you know, I had in my mind, I said how beautiful this show actually was, and you know, the silhouettes and the shapes and everything, and the fabrics that were used, and you know, it has a great balance between, you know, print and between, you know, shapes and between, you know, fabrics and colors and palettes. I mean, it has been.
I think all of the most of the trends that we've touched on today, given this was the first show as well, it's like you can look at this collection and actually you can pinpoint a lot of the trends that we've discussed.
That's very, very true.
But also, of course, we owe a massive thank you, actually. You know, because I don't think that, you know, everyone like would talk about like actually Menswear Fashion Week if Topman hasn't offered what has offered so far and the support that has offered, and this is a great testament, you know, to you know, ideas are extremely important, but if you don't have, you know, the backup, the business backup, you know, to support these ideas, unfortunately, you know, it's not. You cannot go that far, and I think London is amazing in that kind of sense. And this is why you don't see that happening in different parts of the world. And this is something unique that we all have to be very proud of, I think.
What a good note.
Just one last thing, it'll be interesting to see how New York pans out.
Yeah, will be.
Yes. Now they've jumped on that.
You're like, interesting.
Well, I think it's the right thing for them to do, but and sorry if we're running out of time.
No, we're not.
This the whole of what you just said about London has been based on nurturing young talent. And I think we are genuine. I've said it before, it's the only city in the world where all this talent, the majority of it, has come from youth and come from young kids wanting to explore and do new fashion.
And you can't
I don't see any other city in the world where it's come from that point. It's come from the more established players, and then the others have been sort of tacked on around the peripheries. So it'll be interesting to see how something like New York, which is very much more established and straightforward, how that will actually mature and grow. But I think we really have something unique to London.
I do believe that we have something unique, because something that we haven't probably touch, and I know the time is going.
No, don't worry. I'm always
like
conscious of everyone else's
really
time.
Quick, really quick. I want like to make this point is that we owe this like to the universities that they are here in London. I mean, the talent that we have access to. We wouldn't have access if it wasn't St Martin's, if it wasn't RCA, if it wasn't Westminster, London College of Fashion, and many others, which I don't want like to forget, Ravensbourne, so many others. They have done an excellent job of and because they're based here in London, it's easier for us to have access to so many creative and young people that they want to
and people
create
all over the world with different ideas.
They're coming and they
which is why the visa changes are so bad. But anyway, that's a different
even topic. Yeah, but it's important. Cool.
Well, should we give Topman and all the rest of the designers a round of applause for wrapping up?